Hi, I'm Mimi Gerges. Award-winning actor Joseph Fiennes joins me to talk about his lead role in the movie Risen, the biblical story of the resurrection of Jesus. Welcome to the Mimi Gerges Show. The movie Risen has been called the unofficial sequel to The Passion of Christ. After overseeing the death of Jesus, a Roman military tribune, Clavius, who's a fictional character, is ordered to solve the mystery of what happened to Jesus in the days and weeks after the crucifixion. The Romans were all about keeping order, and they did not want these rumors of a risen Messiah causing unrest in Jerusalem. So Clavius and his men start kicking down doors and following leads. Award-winning actor Joseph Fiennes plays the lead role in the movie. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So Joe, do we need another Jesus movie? I mean, hasn't this story already been told?
It has, and it should be told again and again and again, and it will never run out of steam. I think for many people, myself included, it's a very arresting narrative. And plays a huge part in kind of my inner dialogue with faith and what that means to me. And so when this opportunity came via Kevin Reynolds, our wonderful director, I read this script, and the big hook for me was the original angle in which we get to see this story that we know so well play out. And that angle is seeing the narrative unfold through the eyes of a non-believer, through a skeptic. As you said in your introduction, a military tribune. He's
very high level.
He's very high level, exactly. And there were only very few tribunes. And he's posted in Judea, a place that most Romans probably wouldn't want to be posted. It was incredibly tough and violent. And he's really the go-to man for Pontius Pilate to put down the insurrections and the zealot uprisings. And we meet him in the beginning of the film, battle-weary, having just quelled an uprising, and Pontius Pilate calls him in to oversee the crucifixion of Christ, which he does, and he sees him put to death. And for Clavius, it's another day at the office. As it unfolds, as per your introduction, the body goes missing, and they assume that it's rebels who are taking the body and promoting the idea for their cause that the body has risen again. So there's a ticking clock involved in the Emperor Tiberius is arriving, so he's putting pressure on Pontius Pilate, who's put pressure on Clavius. And that's a lovely element. So it becomes, the beginning is almost like a detective story with this ticking clock.
It is very much like a thriller, but how do you get that feeling? Because from the Christian perspective, we know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. We know you're not going to find a body.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Greeks played around with this format, that whenever you see a great Greek classic, the chorus inevitably tell you the end of the story, and then they let you watch it and see how it plays out. So you get a perspective, and you get to see the collision and the anticipation of those colliding events kind of can ramp up the tension. So we know what happens in the story, and we deal with the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. I think one of the few films, if any, have dealt with that in one go. It's a pretty tall order. It seems to me that we've got that balance right. The hardest thing, I think, for this movie is gauging scripture versus creativity.
Because you want to stay true to the story itself.
Exactly. And Kevin Reynolds and our producers have worked diligently within the Christian community with ministers and pastors and the faith-based community to get that right. So it's very respectful and authentic to scripture, but at the same time, I'm hoping that also a cinephile audience and even a faith-based audience that loves cinema, quality cinema, will really enjoy the ride.
Because that's what I was going to ask you. Does this only appeal to Christians?
No, this is, my hope is that this story is witnessed by an auditorium full of a cross-section of society. But there's been many films and a lot of talk about if a movie dealing with biblical narrative has been too revisionist, or from the other side, it's Sunday school and too conservative. And I think this really strikes the balance between both, and I think the early signs are that it looks very positive.
It's a movie that makes you think. It's not your typical Christian-themed movie, even though it's dominated with Christian themes. If you're an atheist, a new believer, an unbeliever, I think you can find yourself in this film.
Tell us a little bit more about your character, Clavius. What drove him?
Clavius is probably at the end of his career, and like most military tribunes or tribunes, they would look to go to the Senate. And to be ambitious was something to be celebrated, not to be embarrassed by. So there was always this ambition, and his ambition would probably be to follow Pontius Pilate or get to the Senate, get back to Rome. So that's a driving force within him. But what I really liked, and part of my research and the back door to the character that opened up to me, was the physical training. So through the physical training, and I did gladiator school and worked with detectives, and I tried to get into
There's actually gladiator school?
There is, in Rome. There's a brilliant team of guys in Rome who actually, I guess the translation from Italian would be physical archaeologists. And what they do is they collect these guys. They're not just sort of stuntmen who go on tour doing gladiator entertainment, but they're actually kind of really well-read and learned guys who go into the museums. They look at the mosaics, the frescoes, the sculptures, anything to do with military warfare, and they reenact it physically. And so they really opened my eyes to the physical nature of the military in that time, and that opened my eyes to the way that they might think, the mindset, the collective mindset, and that was really interesting. Got a few bruises, but it was interesting.
He was kind of religious, even in the beginning.
We had to pitch the character in a believable way that you felt that he could be a part of that squad who put Christ to death at the cross, and then feel that a change could occur in him. And there is a spirituality to him, or a sort of, there's a religious content to him. As all Romans, they prayed to gods, a whole cross-section of gods. And Clavius obviously would be Mars, the god of war. And so he's already got a kind of a dialogue towards his God. And there's a lovely moment in the film where he tries to persuade Yahweh, Yeshua's God, to come over to the Roman side. And that wouldn't have been, during warfare, that wouldn't have been, from the research, uncommon. So they would try to win the enemy's gods over. But what I love about the movie is that this is a character who has kind of a surgical intellect as well as a kind of a brilliance on the battlefield. And suddenly that just, it butts right up against an irrevocable moment in his life when he walks into a room hoping to arrest these disciples, and he comes face to face with somebody who he wouldn't have dreamed he would ever see again in the flesh.
Your character is asked at one point, what do you fear the most? And he said, being wrong.
It's a lovely scene with Clavius and Christ meeting. You're not sure if it's a dream sequence or it's in actuality. But for me, I think audiences will really take something away from that scene. It also deals with faith, and here's Clavius. He's witnessed the resurrection, and yet he still has this doubt. And I think all of us are pursued with doubt. It's almost that our intellect and our philosophizing gets in the way of a channel that needs to be unblocked. And I think that's something that audiences will really engage with.
What frightens you? Being wrong, wagering eternity on it.
One issue that the movie deals with is, there were Roman guards at the tomb. So what happened? There's the storyline of the disciples came and stole the body. And that's something that Clavius really chases down. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting how the movie deals with that. Essentially these two guys go insane. I mean, they start, it's like they're losing their mind.
The two guards, it's lovely to see their story unfold and the effects of what occurred that night. And also the way that Caiaphas moves in politically on that and can't let that information out. So it's a sort of political backdrop as well. But those two characters are changed, just like Clavius is changed irrevocably. And I think in many ways the film is about a very strong type of conditioning that is challenged, and then that conditioning is undone. And we see the effects of that, but we also get to see Okay, now they're undone. Where do they go from there? Some go mad, some take to drink, and some carry the word. We sometimes have to challenge our own conditioning to accept others, and sometimes it's maybe good to look through a culture, a religion, or someone's point of view, not through your eyes, but through their eyes. I love the journey Clavius goes on, where his conditioning crumbles to take on a different landscape, that there might be a world elsewhere from his point of view.
I want to ask you about your family. You're the youngest of 6 siblings, and I think a lot of people are familiar with your eldest brother, Ray Fiennes. How was it growing up in such a talented family? Because it's not just him. You've got sisters that are filmmakers and directors and all kinds of things going on in your family.
When we were young, I didn't think there was any talent there at all. It was just a lot of noise. I don't know what it is, this strange gene pool in which we've gone in the direction of such creativity. I guess my parents had a lot of books and art and painting and history of art and literature was very much promoted in the household. There was very little, if any, television. I don't think I had a television maybe till about 12 or 14. So it was all about one's imagination and being encouraged. But with that, it wasn't kind of a bohemian setting. It was full of absolute discipline. You know, art was taken as seriously as being a doctor or something. So it was all about, well, if you want to do that, let's get dedicated. Let's observe
Study
the discipline that's
right.
needed, within this form.
So what did you guys do, like on summer break? Did you put on plays? Did you film documentaries? I mean, I can only imagine.
I don't know. You make it sound so romantic. I don't think it was anything like that.
Just a bunch of scruffy kids, right?
Yeah, just a bunch of scruffy kids, exactly.
You also are you do stage acting as well. Do you prefer one or the other, stage or film?
Well, film in many ways is by virtue of my work in theatre that I think it was Bernardo Bertolucci who saw me in a Miller play, A View from the Bridge, in London in the West End, and from that moment I was asked to come in and audition for a tiny part in a movie, and I fell into movies. But when I went to drama school, it was only with the intent of doing plays. Film and television just wasn't on the radar at all.
Did you follow your elder brother into that? Was that an influence that he had done it before you?
No, it wasn't. And one has to be influenced by one's inner voice and not someone else. Great guidance when I needed advice, but in terms of the pursuit itself, that was something that I felt from a very young age. I think I was about 7 when I knew, actually, this is the department I need to be in.
So what advice did he give you?
I don't know particularly verbatim what advice, but supportive on especially through drama school, on plays, selecting plays, characters, things like that.
And are you guys all still pretty close now that you're all grown and have your own families?
Yeah, it's a bit disparate, but we're all very close and spend as much time as we can together when we get it.
So I want to ask you about another movie, actually, that you've completed filming on, and this is the unofficial sequel of Chariots of Fire. It's about Eric Liddell. He won the gold medal as a runner in 1924 Olympics, and he was a very devout Christian and went to China after that Olympic win as a missionary. Tell us a little bit about his character. Well,
Eric Liddell, for me, is a saint, and a very humble man, dedicated to Christianity and missionary work. He was born in China, educated in England and Scotland, and was a phenomenal athlete from a young age, and a humble, quiet man. And he got drawn into missionary work partly because of his parents and partly because of someone called Mr. Thompson. And he, after the height of his fame, he just turned his back on all of that and went back to his parents in China, Tianjin in China, and pursued his missionary work. And his family went with him, and sadly, he never got out of there when the Japanese invaded.
I was going to say, this is not a good time to be in China. The Japanese had invaded. He goes into a camp
Yes, when the Japanese invaded, all foreign nationals were the enemy, or soon became the enemy. And most of the film takes place in the concentration camp, and you know, there are many beautiful stories. And I spoke at length with a gentleman who shared his room, who's now in his 90s. You wouldn't know it, he's a sprightly man. But he shared the room with Eric and would talk about how he dedicated his time to prayer every morning at 5, 6 in the morning without any interruption. He would always, every day, pray and invite others to pray. And he kept the morale very high in the camp. He kept the children stimulated with athletics. And he actually broke his rule of not working or playing on a Sunday, and he allowed one day all the children to play hockey or football or something on a Sunday. And so he, in the face of such difficulty, he decided to break his Sunday oath, which was a very interesting challenge to him. And other things, and he was allowed out by Winston Churchill, got him a ticket
Yes.
out. And
he turned it down.
He turned it down and gave his ticket to a pregnant woman. So things like that. He lived by a certain standard.
He also had his wife and children get out. They were able to go to Canada or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I read that his daughter felt abandoned by him. You know, why is he staying there to help those children and not being with me? I'm his own child.
Yeah, I can imagine how disturbing that would have been to lose your father. And I think she got closure on the subject when she met all the survivors of the camp who were her age and maybe a little bit older, who said that Eric got them through university. He had remembered how to write textbooks and taught them in the camp, and when they got out, they got into university.
You know, I want to ask you, because I've heard that some actors, when they play very evil roles or very dark films, especially for a long time, it starts to affect them personally, psychologically. I wonder if you found that to be true, and also since you're playing, you know, lately the roles of an unbeliever who becomes a Christian, or this very strong Christian in Eric Liddell, does that affect you personally, psychologically?
Yes, it does. It's very real. I'm deeply conscious of being respectful to those who have dedicated themselves in this way. And it, you know, it does have a profound effect, and it certainly begins, you begin to examine and focus in on a sort of a dialogue with yourself in regards of what others have done before you, and they become like guides and rocks in that regard. It's hard to ignore that. You know, I think with material like Risen or with Eric Liddell, it's kind of, I don't know if whenever I sometimes walk into a church, I'm overwhelmed by a particular atmosphere. I don't know what it is, whether it's just centuries of prayer in the fabric of the walls or the incense. I don't know what it is, but I feel I'm walking into a profound zone. And it's the same with the narrative form and stepping into the shoes of people like Eric, or working on Risen, or portraying Martin Luther. So you know, I can't escape that.
What would you say is the one biggest message of the film Risen?
I think there are so many messages for the faith-based community and non-believers. For me, what I like is there's a moment where Clavius gets a second chance, and he's forgiven. And as much as that messes with his mind, I think there's a message that we can take from that as an audience member, that there's something very powerful in a second chance, and we often go down a wrong route. And to know that there's that forgiveness is incredible. So I think that's what an audience might take away.
There's also the connection that the disciples make with this Roman guy. And this is a bad Roman,
Yeah.
you know, who was at the crucifixion, was like, yeah, do it, get it done, you know, had no feeling at all. And they connect with him.
Yeah. I love that Clavius might somehow be a part of God's plan, even if he doesn't know it, that he is there to safeguard the word of Christianity and safeguard this group of young men. And I love that he comes into their fold, and certainly as an actor when we were filming, the disciples seemed to have so much more fun than the Romans, so it was great that I could eventually went with them. The apostles are quite a group. joyous beyond belief. It was like spending Christmas with 12 lunatics. They're the best. Yeah, I love that aspect to the film, that relationship, and he, you know, you see him physically shed his uniform as we go through the film, and that's a kind of a spiritual metaphor as well. There's a shedding, and as he sheds himself, he finds himself in a new community.
And at the end, he gives away that ring, doesn't he?
Yes.
Not to give too much away.
Exactly, yeah.
It's showing humanity at its weakest and at its finest. You know, from Clavius' opening scenes to his latter scenes with Lucius, you see that how much faith can change a man and how much love can change a man.
It kind of has a sort of massive twist at the end where you really start to see how powerful faith is and how something that you thought is true all your life can just turn on its head, and it can change you forever.
So what are you working on next?
Next is a play back in the UK, a play by a playwright called Terence Rattigan, and it surrounds the life of T. Lawrence of Arabia. So it picks up after the big film that we know from David Lean, and it examines a breakdown that T. Lawrence experienced, and so it's that portion of his life.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being
Thank
on the
you.
program.
Great
So nice to
pleasure.
talk to you.
Thanks.
This has been the Mimi Gerges Show. Thanks for watching. You can connect with us on social media and leave your comments there. Until next time, thanks for watching.